naval attack on Pearl Harbor was allegedly a surprise military strike by the Imperial Japanese Navy against the United States naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, on the morning of December 7, 1941. This episode of World's Worst Maritime Disasters is a story of lies, spies, deceit, misinformation, and even more conspiracy theories that allowed the United States to enter World War II. The attack was intended as a preemptive strike in order to keep the U.S. Pacific Fleet from interfering with military actions that the Empire of Japan was planning in Southeast Asia against the overseas territories of the United Kingdom, the United States, and the Netherlands. Although Nazi Germany annexed Holland on the 10th of May 1940, their navy in the Pacific had sided with the Allies. The attack on Pearl Harbor commenced at 7:48 a.m. Hawaiian time. The base was attacked by 353 Japanese fighter planes, bombers, and torpedo planes in two waves, launched from 6 aircraft carriers, which are about 300 miles north of the Hawaiian Islands. All 8 U.S. naval battleships were damaged, with 4 being sunk. All but one, the Arizona, was later raised, and 6 of the 8 battleships were returned to service and went on to fight in the war. The Japanese also sank or damaged 3 cruisers, 3 destroyers, an aircraft training ship, and 1 mine layer. In all, 188 U.S. aircraft were destroyed, 2,403 Americans were killed, and 178 others were wounded. Here's the conspiracy theory alert. Strangely, important base installations such as the power stations, the shipyard, maintenance and fuel, and torpedo storage facilities, as well as the submarine piers and headquarters buildings, also home of the intelligence section, were not attacked. Japanese losses were very light, with 29 aircraft and 5 midget submarines being lost, and 65 servicemen killed or wounded. 1 Japanese sailor was captured. The attack came as a complete surprise to the American people and led directly to America's entry into World War II in both the Pacific and European theaters. The following day, December 8th, the United States declared war on Japan. Domestic support for non-interventionism, which had been strong, disappeared overnight. Clandestine government support of Britain with Nazi Germany was replaced by an active alliance. Years later, several writers alleged that parties high in the U.S. and British governments knew of the attack in advance and may have let it happen or even encouraged it, with the aim of bringing America into the war. However, this advanced knowledge conspiracy theory is rejected by most mainstream historians. There were numerous historic precedents for unannounced military actions by Japan. However, the lack of any formal warning, particularly while negotiations were still apparently ongoing, led President Franklin D. Roosevelt to proclaim December 7th, 1941 as, I quote, a day which will live in infamy, unquote. Because the attack happened without a declaration of war and without explicit warning, in the end, the attack on Pearl Harbor was judged by Tokyo war trials to be a war crime. British agent and author Christopher Creighton, also known as John Ainsworth Davis, reported that the impending attack on Pearl Harbor was already known by both President Roosevelt and Britain's Prime Minister Winston Churchill no later than the 28th of November, 1941. He, Creighton, says that he was personally involved in the deliberate sinking of a Dutch submarine, KXVII, or K-17, which had been discovered in advance by the Japanese fleet by chance and reported this information to the British intelligence. The story suggests Roosevelt and Churchill decided that it was too risky to allow the Dutch submarine and its crew to survive, since the crew would have known of the impending attack, and so Roosevelt and Churchill must have also known about that. Now, here's what's known to be true. Japan, Italy, and Germany signed a tripartite agreement. An attack on one would mean the declaration of war on all three. FDR also knew that a Gallup public opinion poll showed that 80% of Americans were opposed to going to war in Europe. He maintained close ties with the British Foreign Office and was having secret talks with British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who himself was a half American and needed U.S. support to defeat the Nazis in Europe. The Americans had broken the Japanese diplomatic code they were using to communicate with its embassies, and the days leading up to December 7th, it became evident from the messages that the Japanese were preparing for war. Naval intelligence knew the Japanese fleet was less than 400 miles from Pearl Harbor, and the Americans imposed a no-sail zone in the commercial shipping traffic in that area. FDR believed that Japan had to clearly fire the first shot for Americans to get into the war. He had previously promised U.S. civilians that he would not get involved in another foreign war. He needed this action to be an attack against U.S. interests. Now, here's what we know for sure. We know the reason for the no-sail zone was to prevent the commercial traffic from spotting the Japanese fleet. Also, they told the bases to expect an attack, but did the Americans really know it was going to be on Pearl Harbor? Who sank that Dutch submarine K-18, which accidentally stumbled on the Imperial Japanese fleet? And the biggest question of all, were all the U.S. aircraft carriers ordered out of Pearl Harbor on maneuvers just days before the attack? And why were all the U.S. planes stored out on the tarmac instead of being in the hangars? Conspiracy theories abound, including one by that British author Creighton, who goes by the nom de plume of spy Lieutenant Commander John Ainsworth Davis, that he sank the sub on orders of British MI5. The Japanese, however, had a different view of the attack. They wanted to make the U.S. fleet so weak that they could not take any serious naval action against Japan in the Pacific. Someone once said, "A trick well played is worth repeating." The U.S. public had been tricked into World War I by the sinking of the Lusitania and the consequent anti-German feelings, and they seem to have been tricked into World War II by Pearl Harbor. So, who were the real winners and losers? The loser was clearly Japan. They planned the attack to weaken the U.S. fleet and to keep Americans out of the war. It didn't work, and thanks to their attack on Pearl Harbor, they lost the war and their imperial empire. The winner? FDR. He now has proof that Japan would invade the continental United States unless stopped, and within days the American public overwhelmingly supported a declaration of war, and public opinion against the war disappeared seemingly overnight. And perhaps the biggest winner, the British, who didn't stand a chance against the Nazis in Europe without U.S. support, and after December 7th, they had the troops, money, and supplies they needed. And who was the main player in this adventure? He was Lord of the Admiralty in World War I and during the sinking of the Lusitania, and British Prime Minister during World War II. Methinks it was Sir Winston Spencer Churchill. But then again, that's just a theory. I'm Alan Stokel, and thank you for watching this episode of World's Worst Maritime Disasters.